Now we are going to replace our implementation with Context API. Context is providing a way to pass data through the component tree without having to pass props down manually at every level. So here in app, let's start with creating a context first. So from the React package, we will get create context. And right here, let's create an old context. And we are just calling create context for this one. Now we are going to wrap this JSX with old context provider. So moving content into this context. So this is a parent element for all the childs in this application, and this context will be having a value. This is value property, and in this value we will have this state information, is logged in and ID, like this. Now I'm just commenting out this part. We are not going to use that state, and for navbar we are not going to set the old property, so removing that one. So this navbar is going to be accessing the context, and we will see that in a bit. Let's also refactor this part. Let's undo this part and let's do it like this. We will have component, and that is just the login page. And let's do the same thing for the user page as well. User page, formatting the document. Now we are back to the way we started for the route parts. Now we have this context provider as the parent element, which is having this value. Now in navbar we are going to use this context, and we can do it like this, opening the navbar. We are going to access to this context object, so let's export it from here, and in navbar we can import auth context from going one directory up, app. So in app we have this auth context, and we are importing that in navbar. Now we have two ways to use context in a functional component. Let's go with the first approach. In this one, we are going to wrap the content with auth context, and this is consumer. So this is provider, the parent one is provider, and in navbar we are consumer. Now as a child element, we are going to pass a function here. So in a JavaScript expression, we will pass a function, and that function will be returning JSX part. So just moving this nav into this part. Now this function will be called with this value object. So let's take it as auth object, and right here we can access to this auth objects is logged in and ID fields is logged in and ID. Now we don't take the auth as prop anymore. For now, let's not focus to the tests because the current implementation will break them, but we are just going to test this one on browser. So the logged in state is false, and navbar is using this context. Let's save these changes. Now on browser, we are seeing sign up and login. Now if I change this one to true, and if I type the ID as, let's say, 7, let's save it, and let's refresh it. Now it is showing my profile, and here we see the link is pointing to user 7, and if I click here I am navigated to user 7. So that's how we are accessing to the context in this component, in this navbar component, and using its data right here. And I mentioned that there are two ways to use context in functional component, and this was one of the options. And the other option is to use hooks. So from React, let's import use context hook from React. And this is much more simpler. And we do just this one, use context, and we pass the context we want to use, auth context. And the returned object is basically the value of this context. And we can take it as auth, like this. Then we don't need to wrap this one with auth context consumer. All we need to have is this now, just cutting this one and removing the remaining and pasting now back. So just like this one, we take the auth object, the value of the context, like this with this hook. So let's save this one. Let's refresh the browser to make sure it is up to date with the changes. And here we see it is working. And if we change this part to false and leave it empty, and if we refresh this one, here the sign up and login links are visible. Now we need to update the context value is logged in and also ID after successful login. So in login page, we need to update this state. We will do an implementation like this. This context value is static. And to make sure the component tree to be rendered after the context is updated, we are going to depend on to a state value for this one. So we will do like this, again, adding this auth part. So instead of having the value assigned like this, we can do something like this. We can go reference to the auth is logged in and auth ID. So the state values are used right here. So whenever we change the state, the component will re-render. Therefore, the navbar is going to be rendering a new layout. So we are having these values in the context, but also we are going to add a function, and let's name this function as on login success. And basically we can pass this set auth for this one. So this is also accessible by context usage. So auth right here we can say auth on login success, and we can do whatever we want for this one. So this is also part of the context value now. By the way, instead of having the assignments like this, we can use spread operator right here. So just like this one. So the auth values is logged in and ID is part of this object, and also we are adding this on login success here as well. Now we are going to use this context in login page 2. We have this functional component here, so let's get use context, and let's also import auth context from app. Then we will have auth use context auth context. So we have this auth object now, and instead of accessing to the login success like this, we are going to get it like this, auth on login success. But this variable name and this one is conflicting. Let's do it like this. Let's cut this object and pass it right here, and let's remove this one. So we are taking on login success from this auth and passing this object, and this is going to be updating this state right here, and it's going to be re-rendering the components. Now let's save these changes. Now the tests are passing, and let's try it on browser. Here opening login, here filling the form, user 3 at mail.com, password, Now the page is redirected, layout is changed, and if I click my profile, here it is opening user 3 page. In previous example, I've shown how we can use the state in the profile card, and in that one we were passing the props down to the user page, then user page was passing it to let's open that one, to the profile card. Now we are not using these anymore, and here in profile card we can just access to the state just like we did in login page or the navigation bar. So here we can get, and we can get the, let's import this out context as well. So it is coming from here, and also we need to import use context from React. So in this one we have this auth object, and we can display the edit button accordingly. Let's save these changes. Now user page, which is a component in the middle, does not do any prop forwarding. So we are seeing this edit button visible on this user page. We don't need this information, but to practice how we can use context in a class component, let's show that one in this user page. So far we have seen how we can use in functional components with the hooks in the profile card, login page, navbar, but also let's show that one here in the user page. So just like using the approach of the having like this one, auth context consumer, we can do the same thing in the class components as well, but there is another approach. First let's import auth context from app. Now the classes has static field for context type, and we can directly assign this auth context to it. Then we can access to the context like this. Let's render this information somewhere here, and like here we can just print this context. So this is basically accessing to this object, this one, and from this one we can take is logged in or ID. So this context has the object, the auth object, and from this one we can take the ID. For instance, let's save this one. So here the 3 is printed, or we can just stringify whole context object. So we have this is logged in true and the ID is 3. So that's how we can use context in class components. We are not going to need this one, so clearing it and also removing this context, static assignment here, removing the unused import, and removing the context usage from profile card. We will not going to use that one for now, and just removing the edit button, saving all these changes, and everything is properly working.